D. Watkins, welcome to Salon TV. Today I'll be joined by Brian Banks and Justin Brooks. Banks was an All-American high school football star with a full scholarship to USC until he was wrongfully convicted of a crime he didn't commit. Despite the gross lack of evidence and conflicting stories from the alleged victim, Banks was forced into a broken justice system and sentenced to a decade of prison and parole. Years later, with the support of Justin Brooks and the California Innocence Project, Banks fought to get his life back and fulfill his dreams of becoming a professional football player, and now it's documented in a heartbreaking film and a really, really, really great book. How you guys doing?
Good, man. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
Was it difficult reliving some of those stories, or just watching it
Absolutely,
on film?
absolutely, man. You know, it's a 10-year ordeal. You know, people have an opportunity to see a film that discusses a 10-year ordeal in the span of 90 minutes. But this was a life journey for me. It was definitely tough reliving some of these moments.
Yeah, your story is extremely rare, and I would like you guys to speak to this because you have all of this stuff going on with Time Is Up and the Me Too movements, but in actuality, these incidents aren't black and white, as we see with your case. Did you guys have trouble with that as you were putting the film together?
Yeah, that issue has come up, and what I always talk about is the overwhelming majority of claims of rape are accurate. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there's lots of women who are raped where they're not reported, but that doesn't mean we can ignore the percentage of innocent people are in there. You know, there's a real problem in this country that everything now is black and white. It's all one thing or another, and that's not the reality. And you know, I always talk about that there's two naive positions about prison. One is that everyone in prison is innocent. The other is that everyone in prison is guilty. The truth is most people in prison are guilty. We got to figure out, you know, what does that most mean and how big is that crack? And Brian is a human being who fell through that crack, and we got to care about that.
Something that was really touched on in the film was the stigma that comes with sexual assault. You know you're an innocent person. You know you didn't do anything wrong, but at the same time, you have to live with that. So what was that like? Or could you touch on that?
You know, I don't wish my experiences on anybody. You know, it's one thing to be incarcerated and accused and convicted of something that you didn't do. It's another to walk the streets labeled and branded a monster, you know, an offender, someone that's taken advantage of a woman. It's really indescribable, the feeling of being on a sex offense list, you know, and when someone wants to move into your neighborhood and they want to know if that neighborhood is safe, they get on the website to check it out. Your name shows, your face shows, your crime, your address. So it's tough, humiliating. You know, you deal with all the people who judge you. You deal with all the people who don't really know the truth, and so therefore they just go based off of, you know, what they've seen in your court proceedings and so forth. So
at times it's like probably even difficult. You probably felt like at times you didn't even really want to go outside.
Absolutely. You know, it's crazy because, you know, they labeled and deemed me a monster, but in fact, I was the one who would leave out of my house every day looking over my shoulder and being afraid of someone recognizing me or coming after me because of what they read online or what they saw in an article or whatnot.
So I read the book and watched the film, and it seemed like you always had like just really high spirits. Is that the case?
Yeah, man.
You meditate or do hot yoga or something?
You know what? I grew up in a household where all we did was laugh and make jokes, and you know, and so I think that carried with me throughout my life, just kind of being lighthearted and finding ways to be positive in crazy situations. But you know, this was an ordeal and a traumatic experience that required way more than just laughter and smiley faces. It really required me to discover who I was as a spiritual being, all the way down to the spirit, you know, and just try to have more of an understanding of myself, my capabilities, the power that I have within me to control my emotions and not let them control me, and just really discovering and only focusing on what I could control and not necessarily what I couldn't.
And the way you dealt with this difficult situation, you definitely deserve to be a household name. Justin, talk about when you guys first met.
Well, it's portrayed really well in the movie that what was extraordinary about this case was Brian. Brian's the first client I've ever had who was out of prison. We're so overwhelmed with work at the California Innocence Project. We can't represent guys who want to clear their name, get off parole. We're dealing with lifers, we're dealing with people on death row. But Brian's case was just so compelling for two reasons. Number one, he had so much taken away from him. Most of my clients just had like regular lives, and we're trying to get them back to it. Brian was going to go to the NFL. Brian had this incredible career ahead of him. And the second thing is, Brian had this compelling evidence of innocence that was not necessarily going to pass the evidence standards in court, but clearly showed he was innocent. And that's frustrating. It's frustrating the way our system is set up that sometimes you got evidence you're innocent, but because of our rules of evidence, you may not be able to introduce it. So everybody in my office wanted to get on board with Brian's case, and it was also important because Brian represents the 95 to 97% of people who plea out in this country. And we need to get that issue out there that now it's become a business decision where innocent people are pleading because they just don't want to risk losing their life.
I think it's like a missing part with the whole criminal justice reform conversation. I've been through the system. The bulk of my friends have been through the system. And people who look at us from the outside are just like, oh yeah, they street guys, or they hustling, or they doing this, or they doing that. So, they getting the break. But they don't really understand that a lot of people in jail right now didn't do anything wrong. It's just somebody comes to you, just like what happened in the film, and they say, look, you can take this 3 to 5, or you can't, or you're gonna get 9, or you're never gonna come home again.
And it wasn't
But
always like that.
I didn't even do anything. It doesn't matter.
It's not relevant.
So
And the lawyers-
as a lawyer, can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, a lawyer will even say that to you in lockup. They'll say, look, whether you did it or not is not relevant. Not relevant.
That's why I'm here.
Because,
This is why America locks up more people than anybody else in the world.
And as we've continued to increase those incarceration rates, we've lessened the number of resources in the system, and now very few cases can go to trial. We don't have the resources to do it. And so you'll sit there and say, look, dude, it doesn't matter whether you did it or not. Well, the way we're going to look at this case is what is the evidence they have against you, and what's the risk you have of going to trial. So it just becomes a business decision. And then when you put in Brian's case, you got a 17-year-old kid sitting there having to make a life or death decision, having a few minutes to do it. It's like you go to a doctor in an emergency room and he says, look, we got to do emergency surgery on you right now. Now you can do the surgery or die. And that was the situation that Brian was in. It was either take the advice I'm giving you right now or die, and it doesn't really matter what the truth is in that.
And we know that there's so many innocent people that's still sitting behind bars right now, as you probably talked to so many of them. I'm working with the Innocence Project, but we know you're innocent. We have proof. We have so much documented evidence. So I want you to try to talk to our viewers about just the mindset of being a person who is innocent, the mindset you had when you were initially accused.
Yeah.
Because I think people need to feel that.
Yeah, I remember, so at this time that I was incarcerated or picked up off the streets, I was 16 years old. I was 11th in the nation as a linebacker for Long Beach Poly High School. It was the summer going into my senior year, the biggest year of sports for me at that time. And I had never been arrested, never been locked up, never had a jaywalking ticket, never had any run-ins with the police before. And then all of a sudden I was in handcuffs and being forced out of my house and been placed into a police car and then taken to a medical facility where they performed a DNA testing on me, which is very, personal, for them to be swabbing you and pulling at you, your pubic hairs and doing different things to you. And I'm 16 years old when all this is taking place. So just before there was even a discussion of jail or being locked up, there was this whole, invasion of privacy of my body, you know what I mean? And then just the first 2 weeks of incarceration, I lost 14 pounds. I wasn't eating food. I wasn't coming out the cell. I wasn't interacting with the people. Everybody kept telling me this would be figured out, so I just sat there and waited, and
It's like, why you take DNA tests for what if they're not even going to try to use it?
And it
Like,
never got,
it
was never used. But yeah, it was some of the hardest moments of my life. Those first few weeks, of incarceration, just knowing that I wasn't supposed to be there, knowing that my school year was about to start and the football season was starting up, and to hear that my school district had expelled me from the district, regardless of the outcome of what happened in the case. It was just a lot to take in at such a young age.
Guilty before you even get a chance to go through trial.
Yeah.
How common is Brian's case?
We receive over 6,000 letters a year of people who have claims. We look into every single one of them. The problem is almost none of them have proof of innocence.
Yeah.
Just like Brian wouldn't have had proof of innocence. Brian wrote us twice from prison, and we had to say, look, there was no evidence that convicted you, and there's no evidence of your innocence either. There's no evidence in this case. And in our country, you have to have extraordinary evidence to come back into court and get your case reopened. So yeah, if you've got a great DNA case, but most cases have nothing to do with DNA. You got drug cases. I used to represent clients in DC, kids. If you're living in that neighborhood and the police raid that neighborhood, all the kids on the street get picked up, they're all going to get charged with drug trafficking. How do they prove they're innocent? How do they say, I'm not with these kids? You don't even have to have the drugs in your pocket to get charged with possession of them. They could be overhanded by a trash can, and every kid in the neighborhood's getting charged with it. So the hardest part of this work is the thousands of people we can't help. Because that's the way the system is set up, and because they get pushed through it at the trial level through these plea bargains, and by the time I take a look at the case, it's too late. If I could get in a time machine and go back, we could fix it, but otherwise we can't.
What is the fix though? So the prison reform is it's a big topic, it's a big conversation right now. We know that so many police officers are liars or racists or clowns who buy into a system where they just do whatever the liars and the racists do. They lose their own identities at times, even when they do come in with good intentions. And we know that they have personal vendettas against people and they just lock up whoever they feel like locking up sometimes. We know that. We know that some of these prosecutors look at these stacks of lies called police reports, see the lies, and they still push them through. So we know that's a part of the problem. So we know.
But it's even bigger than that. It's the whole system. We suffer from 30 years of tough on crime politics. And it goes back to Willie Horton and Mike Dukakis, which I'm old enough to remember.
I remember when Willie Horton went home on a furlough and he did like a rape or a murder or something, right? When Dukakis was governor.
And that's why George Bush I became president.
Because of the Willie Horton scandal.
He came up with this great idea. Why don't we say Mike Dukakis is responsible for that? Because he was the governor who granted him parole. And that's how George Bush won the election. Ever since then, every politician has learned it pays to be tough on crime. You get money from the corrections industry, you get support from the police department unions, you get support from the correctional officers union, and you get votes by scaring people. And so we've filled our prisons, we've overwhelmed the criminal justice system, and now almost every case gets pled out. Brian's case is exactly the result of 3 decades of bad criminal law policy.
So how do we reverse it though? How do we
decriminalize things that shouldn't be criminal? We got to lessen the sentences. We got to start doing real rehabilitation programs in prisons so we don't have 70% recidivism rate where everybody's coming back in the system. And we got to use common sense and stop just doing knee-jerk reactions out of fear or out of vengeance, because none of this does anything for us. Even after Brian was exonerated, we still had to go around and get him off all these lists. He's put on all these sex offender lists to help him get a job. Brian was carrying around the cover of the Los Angeles Times to show he'd been exonerated to rent an apartment. These are the kind of hurdles we put in front of everybody, and then we're surprised when the system doesn't work.
And you were a kid, whereas you got predators like Harvey Weinstein, who has been doing this stuff for 4 decades. So it's even the whole idea of the role that money plays.
Of the people who get away with it and the people who don't. The people who are falsely convicted and the people who are actually committing the crimes and never get caught. We know that race plays a big role in this. We know resources play a big role in this. But what was important in Brian's movie was to show that Brian was a smart guy from a good family who had a private lawyer, and still all this stuff happened to him.
Your mom was a soldier throughout the whole film.
Still is, man. She really went through it, man. Just to, I always tell people I know what it feels like to be wrongfully convicted and put in a cell, but I have no clue of what it feels like to be a mom, to watch your kid be snatched from your protection, from your care, for you to do all that you can to save your kid, and it just falls on deaf ears. I do not know what that feels like, but she does.
So what would you say to a kid that's 16 or 17 years old, innocent or guilty, sitting in his cell or her cell right now? who wants to have a future, and they want to be able to go to college, and they want to be able to do something positive with their lives.
Yeah. The harsh reality is, unfortunately, that it may get worse before it gets better. Once the system get their hands on you, they got you. And it's hard. It's easier for them to put a charge and a crime against you than it is for you to prove and vindicate yourself from the accusation. So it really will. It boils down to trying your best to find someone who's actually going to fight for you, that will really fight for you, and not just say that they will to collect a paycheck. You know, if there's a family member of someone who is behind bars right now listening, stay in their lives, be supportive, be very supportive, because there is no feeling like being alone in a cell. You're already alone by yourself physically. Emotionally, to be alone is a whole different struggle. So never leave their corner, be with them. And for the person who is behind bars, the only thing that you can control is yourself in an uncontrolled environment.
You got to keep writing letters, and you have to keep sending them pictures in, because that's what helps people get through their bills.
That's, by the way, another thing we could do. We put these prisons in the middle of nowhere. In California, they're hundreds of miles from LA, in the middle of the desert, when we know most of the people are in there from those cities. Their families don't have resources. I just recently went to see a client. I'd seen him a year before. I was the last person to see him. So we got people that their families can't afford to get out there.
That does two things. That elevates the economy in that little small town where that jail is, and it punishes the president in a different way, because their family might not be able to get out there to see him.
And it punishes their family who did nothing.
nothing.
And it makes it more likely that guy's coming back to prison, because now he's going to be so disconnected from his family that by the time he goes home, he's not going to have those connections anymore, and everything is harder for him.
So art is starting to play a major role in shining a light on some of these horrible things that happen. I think your film is extremely important. We saw what happened with Dream Hampton's R. Kelly documentary. He's charged in like 8 states now. We see what's happening with Central Park 5 and how just like adding, putting that narrative on Netflix and being able
Station.
to, Fruitvale, all of these different things. So I feel like your film is definitely as good and is going to be up on that level. You guys, you care to speak to the power of art and how it has the power to change?
I mean, I think it's extremely important that we inform people about the realities of our injustice system in as many ways and in any way that we can. There's people who choose not to do, the world of wrongful conviction, the space of wrongful conviction, just the space of the judicial system is not appealing, it's not sexy. So people aren't really going out putting in the necessary time and effort into learning what's going on in their local court office, or, what type of sentences people are receiving for the crimes that they're being accused of, who's going to jail, who's getting let go, what those statistics look like. People don't pay attention to that stuff, so it's kind of easy to push people along through a system because no one's fact-checking it. No one's really looking into what's happening. So I think it's important that people become more informed about what's going on. I think people should take part in jury duty.
Right.
That we stop ducking jury duty. We got a lot of complaints about, all-white juries. We got a lot of complaints about...
White people love jury duty.
Yeah.
They be pulling up. Oh my God, jury duty! It's like his Price is Right. And you just got caught.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the statistics, unfortunately, and the person who's going to be in that defendant chair, more than likely going to be a person of color.
Right.
And you would like to be judged by a jury of your actual peers. But that can't happen if we continuously skip jury duty. So
and art is important because things like Brian's book that he wrote and just put out, and this movie, they're going deeper. I've been doing this work for 30 years, and it's the same news footage every time, right? They want the picture of the dude walking out of prison. They want to see him eating that first meal, but it never goes that deep into, what really happened here. How do we analyze this plane crash that happened in this person's life? And so this movie does that. Brian's book does that. We need more art because people have more of an attention span for it. Whereas when they're watching something on the news, it's a TV commercial. They're not really getting what's happening there.
You guys are definitely changing the world. Tell everyone where they can see the film. Look directly into the camera.
So check it out. August 9th, this Friday, you can go and check out Brian Banks in theaters everywhere. I implore you not to go by yourself, but to bring 1 or 2 people with you. It's one of those films that will inform you, motivate you, and hopefully encourage you to want to see change within our judicial system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.